2 months later, this document would send the prime minister to the firing squad. But in February 1979, it was just a piece of paper. Tehran was still celebrating. The Shah had fled in January. The streets belonged to the people. 37 million Iranians believed the nightmare was over. They were wrong. While the streets cheered, the new leadership quietly assembled a machine. They called it the Islamic Revolutionary Courts. How long does it take to turn justice into a conveyor belt? The answer came quickly. The new regime viewed due process as a weakness. Trials took time. Time allowed the old guard to regroup. So they removed the brakes. No defense attorneys, no juries, no appeals. The goal wasn't truth, it was speed. In the chaos of the transition, legal degrees didn't matter, loyalty did. Officials appointed judges on the spot, ordering them to hand down the first death sentence before sunset. While the provisional government drafted decrees, Sadeq Khalkhali walked through the gates of Evin prison. He was small. He wore thick glasses. To the uninitiated, he looked like a harmless cleric. But inside the courtroom, he was a force of nature. He didn't look at evidence, he looked at souls. And he found them wanting. Khalkhali had spent years in the seminaries, loyal to Khomeini, waiting for the chance to purify the land. Now he had the power of life and death. He wielded it with a terrifying joy. The Western press would soon brand him the hanging judge. Khalkhali didn't mind. His domain was Evin, the concrete fortress at the foot of the Alborz Mountains. The corridors smelled of damp fear and crowded bodies. Former ministers sat on the floor, waiting for their names to be called. The irony was absolute. The cells built by the Shah to break revolutionaries were now packed with the men who built them. The process was a blur. A defendant would be dragged in. Khalkhali would ask a question. The verdict came minutes later. No jury, no appeal. When the gavel fell, the accused stood entirely alone, because defense lawyers were banned from the building. On the night of February 15, 1979, Sadeq Khalkhali signed the death warrants. The ink was barely dry before the guards kicked open the cell doors. There was no time for appeals. There was no time for prayer. The path from the courtroom to the execution post took minutes. 4 men were dragged up the stairs to the rooftop of the Rifa school. The winter air was freezing. Nematollah Nasiri led the line. For 13 years, he had commanded SAVAK. He was the architect of the Shah's police state, the man who knew every secret in the empire. Now, he stood shivering in a civilian coat, facing the barrels of the guns he once controlled. Beside him stood Mehdi Rahimi, the general who had imposed martial law on Tehran. Then Manucher Khosrodad, the elite Air Force commander. Finally, Reza Naji, the iron-fisted governor of Isfahan. The pillars of the monarchy were lined up against a brick wall. The soldiers raised their G3 rifles. The city lights flickered in the background. Nasiri stared into the darkness. A shout cut through the night. Then came the roar. It was not a clean volley. It was a jagged rip of automatic fire. Bullets chewed into the masonry. The impact threw the bodies backward. They crumpled onto the frost-covered roof in a tangled heap of blood and wool. The most powerful men in Iran were dead before they hit the ground. By sunrise, the photos of their corpses were already on the front pages. Tehran woke up to a stunned silence. The rooftop execution of the 4 generals was not an anomaly. It was a prototype. Within days, Qasr prison transformed from a detention center into a conveyor belt of death. Why would a new government splash images of mangled corpses across every newsstand in the country? The answer was fear. The regime needed to prove that the old gods were mortal. The mechanics of terror were efficient. Patrols swept through Tehran, dragging former ministers and SAVAK agents from their homes. They were thrown into the same cells they once filled with dissidents. The irony was lost on the executioners. The judicial process collapsed into a stopwatch race. Trials lasted less than 60 minutes, from the first question to the final verdict. Defendants had no lawyers, no time to prepare, only a quick march to the courtyard. The walls of Qasr, built by the Shah's father, now trapped the noise of the firing squads. Volley after volley. Then came the flashbulbs. Photographers stepped over the warm bodies to get the right angle. The next morning, grainy black and white photos of the dead dominated the front pages. Twisted limbs, shattered faces. The revolution did not hide the violence, it advertised it. By the end of February 1979, the official death toll had already risen into the dozens. While the firing squads were busy with generals, the most powerful civilian in Iran sat in a cold cell. Amir Abbas Hoveyda. He had been prime minister for 12 years. From 1965 to 1977, the longest tenure in modern history. An intellectual who quoted French poetry, smoked a pipe, and wore a fresh orchid in his lapel every day. He stayed in Tehran because he believed in the law. He thought his hands were clean. In April 1979, he walked into the Revolutionary Court. The room was a pressure cooker of sweat, flashbulbs, and cigarette smoke. Hoveyda sat on a simple wooden chair. He faced a judge, not a jury. He faced accusations of war against God, not legal statutes. The trial was theater. Hoveyda tried to reason. He spoke of administration and economics. The court spoke of blood and vengeance. It didn't matter that he was a civilian. The verdict was written before he entered the room. Guilty of spreading corruption on earth. The end did not come at dawn. It came immediately. They dragged him out of the courtroom, a pistol pressed against his neck in the corridor. 2 shots. The man who ran the government for a decade was dead minutes after the gavel fell. The shock was instant. This was not a general who commanded tanks. This was a bureaucrat. Western governments, including France and the United States, immediately issued formal condemnations of the secret trial and summary execution. With the prime minister dead, the revolution's crosshairs shifted. From the public face of the regime to its invisible hands. Who actually controlled fear in Iran? It was SAVAK. Born in 1957, molded by the CIA, sharpened by Mossad. This wasn't just an intelligence agency. It was a suffocating blanket over the entire nation. They had a file on everyone, every student, every cleric, every shopkeeper who complained about the price of bread. The paranoia was total. You couldn't trust your neighbor. You couldn't trust your brother. SAVAK made sure that anywhere 2 people gathered, a third was listening. This omnipresent terror explains the ferocity of what followed. The mob didn't just want justice. They wanted to tear the eyes out of the state. But history has a cruel sense of irony. The men who had spent decades breaking spines in soundproof basements now found themselves strapped to the same metal chairs. The immunity was gone. Revolutionary Guards kicked down the doors of safe houses across Tehran. In April 1979, the Revolutionary Court summoned the man who had originally engineered the entire apparatus of control. General Hassan Pakravan. He was not the typical thug associated with the dungeon. Pakravan was a ghost from a different era. He led SAVAK from 1961 to 1965, serving as its intellectual architect rather than its butcher. Educated in France, he spoke with the polish of a diplomat and the precision of a strategist. He built the surveillance grid that monitored millions. To the mullahs, his refined manners made him even more dangerous. He represented the calculated, intelligent face of the monarchy's survival instinct. In the chaotic courtroom, the contrast was absolute. Pakravan stood with perfect military posture. His uniform was gone, but his discipline remained. Around him, guards shouted and spectators chanted. But the general listened to the charges in silence. The trial was not a legal proceeding. It was a liquidation of the old regime's brain. On April 11th, a firing squad executed Pakravan in the courtyard of Qasr prison. Why did an army with thousands of tanks surrender without a fight? General Pakravan's death was a signal. But the true danger to Ruhollah Khomeini wasn't the spies in the shadows. It was the 400,000 men in uniform standing in the light. The monarchy had collapsed. The military machine had not. Hundreds of garrisons remained operational. Warehouses were stacked with American ammunition. Squadrons of F-14s sat fueled on the runways. This was a loaded weapon left on the table, and the finger on the trigger could belong to anyone. In the 20th century, Most revolutions didn't die from politics. They died from counter-coups. The new leadership understood the math. A single loyalist regiment could retake Tehran in hours. The firing squads in the prison courtyards served a dual purpose. These executions were not just punishment for the past. They were cold insurance for the future. To kill the body, you must sever the head. The images of Generals Nasiri and Rahimi lying in the morgue circulated through every barracks in Iran. The message was absolute. Resistance meant death. Fear paralyzed the chain of command. The remaining commanders realized that silence was their only shield. One by one, the officers holstered their sidearms and swore allegiance to the new regime.
What do you take when you have 1 hour to pack a lifetime? A photo album, gold, or just your children? While the generals were dying in prison courtyards, a different kind of hysteria engulfed the terminals of Mehrabad Airport. The departure halls turned into a crush of bodies. Ministers, architects, bankers. Yesterday, they were the elite. Today, they were just desperate faces pressing against the glass. Ticket prices tripled on the black market, then quadrupled. It didn't matter. Money had lost its meaning. Survival was the only currency. In the affluent suburbs of Shemiran, smoke rose from the chimneys. It was a warm spring, but the fireplaces were roaring. Families weren't heating their homes. They were erasing their pasts. They threw letters from the royal court into the flames. Photos with the Shah curled and turned to black. Contracts, diaries, decades of history turned into ash in minutes. The smell of burning paper hung over the northern districts like a fog. The choice was binary. Leave now or risk the revolutionary committees later. The new authorities were already seizing government archives. They didn't need warrants. They needed names. And if your name was found in a ledger from the old regime, the sentence was often death. So they ran. They left Mercedes sedans at the airport curb, keys still in the ignition. They left front doors unlocked. They left grand pianos, heirlooms, and deeds to factories. A lifetime of accumulation was abandoned for a single boarding pass. The lucky ones squeezed onto the last flights, watching Tehran disappear beneath the clouds. The planes climbed over the Alborz mountains. Below, the mansions stood dark. Nobody answered the door. By late 1979, the runways were empty and the rifles in Evin prison finally cooled. The chaos of the spring hardened into a rigid structure. The Islamic Republic of Iran established itself on a foundation poured with the blood of former leaders. Ruhollah Khomeini assumed the title of Supreme Leader. He held absolute authority over every court and mosque. The nation watched the transformation in shock. The trials took minutes. The executions were public theater. The psychological impact of seeing untouchable officials broken on national television seared itself into the collective memory for decades.